Reprise de débat. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today and want to begin by acknowledging that we're on the unceded territory of the Algonquin of Golden Lake. We say Miigwech. Au début de mon petit discours,
at the outset of my short speech, I'd also like to thank my colleague from Perth, Wellington. I'm really pleased that he decided to share his time with me. And I also want to thank the member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie, another colleague who served on the Special Committee on Electoral Reform. We worked together for several months. We worked very hard. And today's debate is quite clear that in the opinion of the House, the government misled Canadians on its platform and throne speech commitment that, quote, 2015 will be the last federal election conducted under the first-past-the-post voting system, unquote, and that the House call on the government to apologize to Canadians for breaking its promise. But, Madam Speaker, the promise is even clearer than that. The Liberals said, we will put forth a bill for electoral reform. And now, given all the testimony we received at the Standing Committee or the Special Committee on Electoral Reform, the promise is broken.
So I want to take this House, my colleagues who are here today, through what we heard in the Electoral Reform Committee, and then put that up against the question that is before us today. Do I vote for a resolution that says that, in the opinion of this House, the government misled Canadians? Let me start with what I specifically heard in my own riding. I sent out a questionnaire to all members of every household in the riding, and the households of Saanich Gulf Islands filled out forms and sent them back to me by the hundreds, overwhelmingly favoring proportional representation as a new system of voting. I also held town halls within my riding. 400 people showed up in Sydney, in British Columbia, my home where I live in Sydney, with 400 people. In Saturna, a tiny island, we had 80 people, in the honor of the former Minister for Democratic Institutions participating. We had about 150 people out on Salt Spring Island. So those were the town halls within my riding. I also conducted town halls with the Green Party in many communities across Canada. Overwhelmingly, what we heard in those town halls was, we like this promise. It influenced us to vote. Many people said they voted Liberal because of that promise. And for me, as an individual, I have to say it influenced my vote. I don't think I know. I'm the only member of the opposition who voted for the speech from the throne because that promise meant so much to me. And it was clear, black and white, that 2015 would be the last election held under first-past-the-post. As well, I was honored to be named and voted by this House as a member of the Special Committee on Electoral Reform. We had great leadership. I want to say, just as my colleague from Lac Saint-Louis just moments ago mentioned, that Lac Saint-Louis is the name of the riding for the chair of the committee. It was my colleague, my conservative colleague from Saint-Louis, who said that we'd had great leadership from the chair, the member from Lac Saint-Louis. We worked together as a team. We worked very hard. We heard from thousands and thousands of Canadians and virtually every expert on electoral reform from within Canada and from around the world. We discovered, when we dug deep into this issue, that we were not the first parliamentary committee to study whether first-past-the-post was a good voting system for Canada. The first committee was actually in 1921, and it concluded that it did not serve Canada well, that in any democracy that had more than two parties, first-past-the-post would distort the results and result in elections of parties that were not supported by the majority of Canadians, but that would enjoy majority power. Some of the evidence that was very compelling, and I could go on at length, but I won't have time now, but just to say the evidence was overwhelming that proportional representation would serve Canada better. we heard from one of the preeminent global experts by video conference from Stanford University in California, Professor Arndt Liebhardt, who has in his seminal work, Patterns of Democracy, studied 36 democracies over a period of time, studying every single election in 36 democracies from 1945 to virtually now, to look to see if there's a difference between what he described as majoritarian systems, using first-past-the-post or ranked ballots within first-past-the-post, and consensual democracies, which are those with proportional representation, found on average 7% higher voter turnout in those countries that have proportional representation. Much higher representation of women and marginalized groups, ethnic minorities in countries with PR, but perhaps surprisingly, stronger environmental regulations and better macroeconomic performance. So the bugaboos about proportional representation that will lead to extremists getting into Parliament and so on have been disproved over and over again, including in the text of our report. We recognize it's a risk, but either with a mixed member proportional system with a threshold or with using single transferable vote, the electorate is not going to be giving a seat to an extremist party if the government looks at the recommendations of our committee, which said clearly we would specifically not advise using the system used in Israel, or any system where you vote purely based on the party. We want to make sure that our democracy always has that link between a local MP and ensures proportionality. So now I turn, with the time I have left, to the specifics of this resolution, that the government misled Canadians in its platform and in the speech from the throne. And every speaker on behalf of the government today has denied that there was any intent to mislead, nor that they actually misled anyone. The words good faith have been used. We made this promise in good faith. So I'm trying, because I know the only way we're going to get fair voting in Canada is if we can somehow get past partisanship. We nearly did it in our committee. I believe if we'd had more time, if we'd had a consensus-based process within our committee instead of falling to default at the end to voting and so on, and I can't reveal what happened in Canberra, but I believe if we'd followed a consensus process with more time, we could have gotten to a conclusion with which we could all agree. But to suspend partisanship and to suspend disbelief, as a member of Parliament, I've got two choices here. I can either accept there was a deliberate attempt to mislead Canadians by making a promise with no intent to keep it, or I can accept the words from all my Liberal colleagues that there was good faith, no intent to mislead, and that leaves only one conclusion. They still want to keep this promise. They just can't figure out how. Those are the two choices we have. We're either facing a government that misled us as Canadian voters and as members of Parliament, or we're dealing with a Prime Minister and ministers and cabinet that can't figure out where we go from here. We've heard from the former parliamentary secretary today, the member of Parliament from Ajax. We just did not, I'm paraphrasing, I took notes as he was speaking, we did not see a clear path forward. The Prime Minister himself in this place has never once said, we were wrong, first past the post is a good system, and thank goodness for that. That means, I believe, that we can still infer that the Prime Minister would rather keep his promise than break it. So what can we do now? Can we help the government by putting this promise back in the front window so they will not break faith with the Canadians who believed in them and believed that promise? How do we do that? Well, fortunately, there are numerous ways forward. One would be to say, okay, if you were rash in promising you'd get rid of first past the post by 2019, what if we did a path over a period of elections? By 2019, there will be, if we were to take it incrementally, some additional seats under mixed member proportional. Or if we were to take it under single transferable vote, we'd cluster most of the ridings in urban Canada and areas where they're clusterable for those who understand the system. In other words, there are places for a landing ground where we can make the promise work. We must not leave the future of Canada's democracy with a system so perverse that a minority of the voters can give majority power to an extremist, future demagogue / false populist, alt-right, whatever you want to imagine, or for my friends in the Conservative Party, extremist left-wing. We need the kind of parliament that reflects how Canadians actually voted. That's the heart of democracy. That's the heart of the promise, and it must be kept.
Questions?